Every year, thousands of new educators enter the classroom with a shared assumption. They believe instruction operates in a straight line. You acquire expertise at the university, execute a lesson plan, and learning automatically outputs. But when this rigid model contacts a live classroom, it collapses into a chaotic environment of human variables. This collision between theory and reality causes immediate professional fallout. Highly prepared graduates find themselves completely overwhelmed by unruly classrooms and failed lessons. Many react by blaming their university training, frustrated they weren't handed simple recipes for control. Effective instruction requires a specific internal architecture to navigate the variables of a live classroom. It functions as a complex, active practice rather than a passive handoff of information. To survive the classroom, educators must abandon the search for universal teaching recipes. They must learn to diagnose and adapt to dynamic, real-time variables instead. There is a persistent myth that teaching is simple. The assumption is anyone can teach, that the job requires little more than reading from a textbook while keeping a room quiet. This myth is actually reinforced by watching expert educators at work. When a veteran teacher flawlessly navigates a difficult lesson, their immense real-time cognitive processing is entirely invisible to the observer. The skill required to manage the room is masked by the smooth execution of the act. Former Chrysler CEO Lee Iacocca framed the stakes of this profession clearly. He argued that passing civilization along from one generation to the next ought to be the highest honor and the highest responsibility anyone could have. Educational researcher Lee Schulman spent 30 years studying this process. Far from a simple transfer of knowledge, he defined classroom instruction as perhaps the most complex, demanding, and frightening activity our species has ever invented. Operating successfully in this environment requires an educator to orchestrate multiple, overlapping knowledge bases simultaneously. They are managing content, pedagogical strategies, curriculum plans, and the socio-cultural backgrounds of dozens of distinct learners all at once. Because the classroom is inherently unpredictable, a teacher cannot survive as a passive transmitter. They must rapidly evolve into a highly active, reflective practitioner. Let's look at a clinical failure. Consider Peter, a well-prepared novice teacher, executing a lesson on electrical circuits for an 8th grade science class. Peter approaches the lesson with a rigid methodology. He perfectly scripts his lecture, dictates the rules of potential difference and resistance to the class, and then issues a blanket prompt, asking the room if there are any questions. The classroom responds with absolute silence. Peter incorrectly decodes this silence. He takes the lack of questions as a metric of complete student comprehension, assuming his data transfer was a success. The reality of the lesson reveals itself in the corridor afterward. As the students file out, Peter overhears them admitting to each other that they understood not one bit of the lecture. The systemic failure here is a matter of definition. Peter assumed that telling the students the facts was exactly synonymous with teaching them. He operated with a massive critical blind spot. By focusing exclusively on his own verbal output, he completely ignored the learner's prior knowledge or their socio-cultural reality, like the simple fact that some of his students might not have residential electricity at home. Perfectly prepared subject content is entirely useless if the teacher lacks the mechanism to ensure the data is cognitively received and compiled by the student. Teacher education historically divided content knowledge from pedagogical knowledge. Operating in isolation causes catastrophic lessons. We need their intersection, pedagogical content knowledge. PCK translates subject matter so learners can digest it, anticipating their misconceptions, adapting frameworks, and assessing prior knowledge before presenting new material. If we apply the PCK model directly to Peter's failure, a completely different outcome emerges. If Peter possessed pedagogical content knowledge, he would have explicitly known the exact cognitive bottlenecks 8th graders face when visualizing voltage. Instead of dictating abstract rules, he would have preemptively adjusted his analogies to map onto concepts the students already understood. Educational theory provides an analytical lens to decode the environment in real time, moving beyond a simple recitation of facts. Pedagogical content knowledge connects the library of what the teacher knows to what the student is currently capable of understanding. There's a pervasive professional fallacy that raw time spent in a classroom automatically generates teaching wisdom. As educational researchers warn, a teacher with 20 years of experience might not have 2 decades of wisdom. They might simply be repeating their first year of mediocre experience 20 times over. To prevent this stagnation, educators must engage in reflective practice. This is the sole mechanism capable of converting a raw, chaotic life event into a structured, usable learning experience. Reflection has 3 states. First, reflection for action, proactively mapping learner bottlenecks before the lesson begins. Second, reflection in action, real-time, rapid pivoting mid-lesson when plans fail. Third, reflection on action, the critical post-mortem assessment, extracting data for future use. Without operating across all 3 temporal states, an educator remains permanently trapped in habitual, unthinking, and highly ineffective intervention. To move from abstract theory to daily application, we use a 4-step cycle known as the data process. Step 1 is describe. The educator must strip away all emotional judgment and simply document the clinical facts of the classroom event. For Peter, the pure description is straightforward. I lectured, I asked for questions, the students were silent, but they failed the subsequent assessment. Step 2 is analyze. The goal here is to interrogate the underlying assumptions and professional blind spots. Through analysis, Peter admits he falsely assumed silence equated to comprehension. Step 3 is theorize. The educator consults formal theory to identify alternative instructional frameworks. Step 4 is act. The educator deploys the new instructional variable to test the hypothesis against real data. The data protocol converts a catastrophic classroom failure into vital evidence for professional growth. Let's test this professional architecture against a completely unpredictable environmental variable. We'll look at a new case study in Maria's classroom. Maria is running her class on a tight schedule. Suddenly, a massive blue crane lands right outside the window. The students immediately rush the glass, and her meticulously planned lesson is instantly destroyed. Maria's initial, unreflective reaction is driven by panic. Prioritizing her rigid schedule over the students' curiosity, she views the disruption as a loss of control and physically pulls down the blinds to force behavioral compliance. Later, Maria processes this failure through the data cycle. During the analysis phase, she realizes she was operating under a deeply flawed assumption that any spontaneous deviation from her lesson plan automatically equaled indiscipline. This leads to a theoretical pivot. Maria knows that the blue crane is printed on the national 5-cent coin. By combining this specific pedagogical content knowledge with structured reflection, she realizes she destroyed an authentic learning opportunity that could have organically linked science with social studies. Expert teachers don't pull the blinds down on reality. They use their PCK framework to instantly hijack unexpected events and map them directly back to the curriculum. The classroom will forever remain an environment of super complexity and unavoidable messiness. The ultimate goal of a professional educator is not to forcefully eliminate this chaos. The goal is to build a robust internal system capable of absorbing it. By continuously testing formal academic theory against raw classroom data, teachers construct a highly personal, constantly evolving philosophy of practice. When an educator is fully equipped with pedagogical content knowledge and a structured reflection protocol, instruction ceases to be a reactive, daily struggle for control. Teaching operates as a dynamic, deeply intellectual, and constantly iterative professional practice.